All right. What's up, Jim?
Doing well. Good morning, Jared.
Good morning. Yeah.
Special morning session for us here
Yeah.
on the GDB, right?
Yeah. It's nice and cold and rainy too.
It
So
is. It
feels
is. Yeah.
nice.
So I'm back from the dead. Had a pretty good bug go through my house, and I'm on the downside of it now. So back in
Nice.
the game. I appreciate
Yeah.
your patience with
Good to
me.
have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Right. So yes, and today it's gonna be fun. We're gonna get into Camus, kind of a return to existentialism for us. We spent a lot of time on existentialism with Heidegger and Sartre. I think it was total of 4 episodes, really 5 if you count the episode with Todd too.
Yep.
About existentialism. Now we're coming
Because
back.
we'll probably always have a foot in existentialism at some
I
any
get a
point.
sense that it's like existentialism is something that neither of us are going to shed anytime soon, right? So I think we can count on that, right? So let's do the prelim. What are you reading this week?
Yeah, this week it's actually mostly just the Myth of Sisyphus that we're going to talk about today, because I just have had kind of now that class is going and people are back, it just is a lot more busy. So my reading time is a little more limited.
Yeah. I mean, you actually have a legit full-time job and teach on top of that, and still find time to give to the Legion here on the GDB, right?
Absolutely.
And I know your only regret is that you don't have more to give. I know that.
Exactly.
I know that, right? So,
How about you, man?
all right, I continue. I think last time I had already started this. I continue to work on volume 2 of Deleuze and Guattari's Capitalism and Schizophrenia, The Thousand Plateaus. And I've spent a lot of the week looking at that and then some commentary on it because it is a difficult book. And I continue to work on Moby Dick, right? Coming close to the end of that one. And this is, I think I've made this understatement before, but I'm going to do it again. That's one hell of a novel, right? And yeah, and I've I read a little paper by Zizek too this week. So,
Nice.
yeah, and who's someone I think at some point we'll have to include some of his work here on the show.
Absolutely. Eventually, maybe get him on the show. That'd be fun.
Yeah. I mean,
if he would do it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it could be entirely ruled out that could happen. Actually.
Yeah, eventually we will have to do an episode on Moby Dick, though. I think, or maybe even more than one. I mean, that's a thick tome, so I think
it's a thick tome.
Giving it its due.
It is, I think, maybe the greatest philosophical novel.
Nice.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome.
And not that philosophy should be the bar by which we judge literature, but yeah, true. All right. So this week we're going to go with Albert Camus. This is in answer to a request from a friend of mine, who is reading this text, The Myth of Sisyphus. It said he was having a hard time with it, so maybe we could jump in on it, right? So we're going to do this for my buddy. A little bit about Camus. Camus won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1957. I think, Jared, you're not surprised to hear that, because one, you've already knew it, and two, because I know you've been impressed with the style of this thing, right?
Yes.
When I was in grad school, my reading French exam was an excerpt from this book, right? And I think partly because Camus' style is like so crystal clear and so readable that it was a good place to humanely test somebody who is not gifted in languages.
Yes.
And so what we're reading is Myth of Sisyphus and Other Essays is how it's put together in the English translation. I don't think it was originally a monograph. I think Camus, even in the prefatory material, refers to it as a collection.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's a common theme throughout. Today, we're going to do the first chapter, or the first essay, which is fully half of the book. Okay, called "An Absurd Reasoning." And then we'll finish it next week with the rest of it, including the title essay, Myth of Sisyphus. Right, and I think I can speak for both of us, Jared, that we were quite impressed in reading this. Right?
Yes. Yeah, it's funny because I've read some Camus before. I've even read this Tiller essay before, but it just for some reason jumped out at me this time. And I really like his writing style. He doesn't have many moments where he just goes on and on about something similar. He's much more kind of aphoristic. He kind of just says what he means and then moves on. And I just really appreciate that.
Yeah. This was, at least in the 90s, was like kind of standard issue in undergraduate existentialism courses. So I read it then. And then, of course, I read an excerpt of it on my French exam. But since I have not sat down with this book, and I was rather impressed with what we got here. So, we're in it. Yeah.
I think also, too, when it comes to the time in your life when you read something like this as well, the experiences you've had, that, especially with this one, we're going to talk about a lot of it's absurdity, just the experiences that lead into that as a phenomena.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so shall we jump in?
Let's do it.
Do you have an entry point you want to go
begin at the beginning, I guess, would be a good spot. Yeah. So the very first two lines, I think, lays out a pretty good situation of what he's trying to do, or context of what he's trying to do. He says there's but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental questions of philosophy. So right off the outset, you know what he's going to talk about.
Yeah. I mean, and he hits you right up front. It's like the only thing worth talking about in philosophy is whether or not you should unalive yourself. Right.
Yes.
That's really what it is. Okay. I think we'll see as we go on that suicide here is, I think it's meant literally at some level, right? But also he talks later about what he calls philosophical suicide. And I think suicide can mean literally making yourself no longer among the living. It can also mean for him, I think, denying your status as a free subject too.
Yes.
I think maybe the more important question for him is whether or not we can actually maintain our standing as free subjects, or do we always enter into a kind of, metaphorically speaking, suicidal denial of ourselves as free subjects, right? Which I think is probably the real worry that he has here. Right.
Yes. And he's kind of swimming in the waters of the problems of nihilism at the time, especially in France. And as well as the recognition that consciousness exists and that sometimes we're not in control of it, right? That other things can often lead us towards thinking certain ways. So he calls it like a suicide of the intellect, right?
Yeah.
That we're giving over our minds to something that we don't fully understand.
And I think we should say up front, okay, especially, hopefully we don't get, shut down on YouTube for saying the S word, right? But that Camus throughout is saying he sees suicide as a kind of dodge, right? Okay, and whether it's literal bodily suicide or it's these other kinds of suicide he's going to talk about, is he sees that there's a kind of cowardice in this, right?
Yes.
And that there is a sort of noble, courageous existence that can be had, right? But one has to kind of go through the suicide question, I think, to get to it for him, right? And okay, so something that I wanted to mention about the text here is, in looking at it now more maturely, it really seems to me what Camus is doing in at least this essay, Absurd Reasoning, or An Absurd Reasoning is the title, is he's giving us kind of an inverted version of Descartes' Meditations, okay? Because he repeatedly talks about light, okay? But it's interesting, though, for him, light obscures, okay? Light actually blocks. It's sort of you're blinded by the light kind of thing, okay? And now notice in Descartes' Meditations, light is a metaphor for clarity, right? It's by the natural light of reason, right? And that notion has a history that Descartes is drawing on, okay? And it seems that what Camus is doing in this essay is he's starting out in this like Cartesian methods, what am I actually certain of? Okay, what am I actually certain of? And then what can I deduce from that about what I should do, what more broadly what the world is, et cetera, et cetera. In the same way that Descartes, starts out by saying, what can I be absolutely certain of? What's revealed to me by the light of reason? And he comes to this sort of surety of his own existence, and then builds from that a surety that reason, in fact, can grasp the world, right? And that's the Cartesian move, is that given the surety of our own existence, right? Given the surety of our essence too, for Descartes, right? I am, what am I? I'm a thinking thing. That then, for him, through a long string of reasoning, entails, that God exists, and that thereby I can rely that I can know the world in its fullness, and thereby my moral projects, my ethical projects are all on a good footing. Okay, the whole thing. And I think what Camus is saying is, no, man, the only thing I'm certain of is I have an overwhelming sense that the world should make sense. There's a demand of reason, and I have an overwhelming sense that the world does not make sense.
Yes.
And that's as far as I get, right?
Yes.
And it's that realization that the world should make sense and it doesn't, which is, I think for Camus, that's the absurd.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. And I think and this is important for him, that there's two pieces to this. One, we rightly demand that the world makes sense. Okay. Okay. And this is important for what follows. He does not think we should give that up. Like, the demand should be made and continue to be made. The world should make sense, damn it. And if it doesn't, I'm pissed. Right?
Yes.
Okay. And two, there's the claim, equally certain for him, that in fact the world makes no damn sense whatsoever.
Yes.
Right. And it's that tension wherein the absurd is born for Camus.
Yes. What I really like about Camus as well is that he fully embraces the experiences we have and how that affects us. So not just pure logic or just pure reasoning, but also the way things are experienced.
Yes.
So one of the things he shares is this man who killed himself because his daughter passed away at a very young age. And so for him, he's like, well, the world, that shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have lost my daughter. And so he bumped up against the absurd through this terrible experience. And of course he went through with, unaliving himself. But he has this great line where he says that,
see the point there that you're making, which is excellent, is on the one hand, there's reason demands that the world would make a kind of moral sense where innocent children don't die, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other hand, what happens? That very thing that shouldn't happen happens, right?
Yes.
And Camus agrees that should not happen, right?
Right.
Reason's right, that shouldn't happen, and yet that's what does happen.
Exactly.
He's rejecting Hegel's claim that the real is the rational and the rational is the real, right?
Exactly.
He's saying that's exactly not the case. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no. So basically he says that I was told that he had lost his daughter 5 years before, that he had changed greatly since, and that experience had, quote unquote, undermined him. A more exact word cannot be imagined. So he's talking about undermined. Beginning to think is beginning to be undermined. Society has but little connection with such beginnings. The worm is in man's heart. That is where it must be sought. One must follow and understand this fatal game that leads from lucidity in the face of existence to flight from light. So to your point about light, and I love that he says the worm is in man's heart, and that's where it must be sought. Yes. Because sometimes I get really, I don't know if annoyed is the right word, but when people talk about pure intellect or pure reason or all that, it's like, you're not understanding the human project then, if you're not also considering the emotive and how much that can undermine us or lead us in ways that we didn't expect.
And I think what's going on with that passage there that you read, which is a really brilliant selection, is, okay, the light of reason could make up a just so story where it makes perfectly good sense that your daughter died.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You could come up with some Leibnizian rationalist story wherein this makes perfectly good sense. Okay. I think Camus would say you've just lost touch with the real world then.
Yes.
Okay. Like that's the light of reason is obscuring. You're being blinded by it. And instead what's keeping you grounded, what's keeping you in touch with the real is this worm in the heart that says, no way in hell, right?
Exactly.
That should happen. And so that reason untethered from the worm in the heart is a metaphor I like a lot that comes from John McDowell, is just, it's frictionless spinning in a void, right? It's just it's a conceptual game we're playing that could never be refuted because it never gets outside of itself. You're just making inferences on an arbitrary chessboard, right? Which is a satisfying game to play. But Camus saying you've just lost touch though, right?
Yes.
And if you're in touch, what keeps you in touch is that sneaking suspicion that something really criminal has happened in this world, right? It cannot fit into our system of reason. right?
Absolutely.
But again, though, he's not saying, and then thereby reason has no demand. That's going to be one of his suicides
Yes.
he wants to avoid. So if I could take us to page 5, right? I think we're both using the vintage, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm on that first full paragraph on page 5. Camus says, what then is that incalculable feeling that deprives the mind of the sleep necessary to life? Okay, end quote. I love that. The only way you're going to really get around is if you're in a kind of dream state. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, and now once again, I think that these sleep metaphors are all over this, and I think again, it's a play on Descartes, right? So Descartes says, for all I know, I'm dreaming, right? Okay. And I think Camus is saying most people are.
Yes.
Most people are. Okay. So going back to Camus, a world that can be explained even with bad reasons is a familiar world. But on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, right? Lights are illusions. Man feels an alien, a stranger. His exile is without remedy, since he is deprived of the memory of a lost home or the hope of a promised land. The divorce between man and his life, the actor and his setting, is properly the feeling of the absurd. All healthy men having thought of their own suicide, it can be seen without further explanation that there is a direct connection between this feeling and the longing for death. Right? And so I think what he's saying there, though, is to wake out of the dream world, right, which is the world for him of pure light, pure reason, and into the real world, will then, to the honest person, create the tension between the emotional and the rational, right? And then thereby puts you in the absurd, which raises the absurd question. It's like, should I just give up?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, so the very next paragraph, the last 2 lines, says, it is legitimate to wonder clearly and without false pathos whether a conclusion of this importance requires forsaking as rapidly as possible an incomprehensible condition. I am speaking, of course, of men inclined to be in harmony with themselves.
Yeah.
So to be okay with disharmony.
Yes.
Because the puzzle pieces aren't fitting.
Yeah, because these two pieces are constituent of us, of our subjectivity, right? On the one hand, there's the demand of reason, which Camus is saying is part of you, right? And the other part is the worm in the heart that says, this does not work, right? There's something wrong here. If I could take us to page 8, first full paragraph, Camus says, thus, everything contributes to spreading confusion. Hitherto, and it has not been wasted effort. People have played on words and pretended to believe that refusing to grant a meaning to life necessarily leads to declaring that it is not worth living. In truth, there is no necessary measure between these two judgments. One merely has to refuse to be misled by the confusions, divorces, and inconsistencies previously pointed out. I'm going to skip down a little bit. He says, does its absurdity require one to escape it through hope or suicide? This is what must be clarified, hunted down, and elucidated while brushing aside all the rest. Does the absurd dictate death? This problem must be given priority over others, outside all methods of thought and all exercises of disinterested mind, end quote. Okay, so that's the question, right? So I think what he's saying is I don't think it's a question of whether Camus is a nihilist. Maybe we can pick at this as this discussion goes on. I think he is. I think he's saying, if what you mean by nihilism is that life is not a semantic symbol of anything else, right? It doesn't point to anything else. There's no homeland that we've come from, right? There's no memory of a platonic, heaven, or platonic, land of eternity, right? And there's no hope of something like a Christian apocalypse wherein everything will be solved, right? So we don't come from a place where everything was solved. We're not going to a place where everything is solved. There's no nostalgia, right? I think Camus would say, yeah, that's to say there's no meaning to life. So it's a kind of nihilism. But now the question is, does that nihilistic conclusion for him mean that life isn't worth living, right? Okay. And if you say life isn't worth living, given nihilism, then you've got a choice, right? Right. Either you unalive yourself, okay, or you deny yourself as a free thinking subject and you fall into hope, right? Meaning an irrational hope of some sort, right? The And I think that's exactly like the question here is like there's two kinds of death for him. There's like literal bodily death, and there's a kind of death of subjectivity. And do we take one of those pills, or do we face the absurd and find a kind of happiness in the absurd? For
Yes.
yeah.
Which I think he gives a great answer later on in this essay.
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to, just in terms of the methods going on here, I want to skip up to another passage, if you don't mind. Okay, so I'm all the way up on page. I gotta look it up here real quick. Sorry, a little clunky here. I'm on page 27. He gives us a little summary there. Okay, bottom page 27. He says about midway through the paragraph. At this point of his effort, man stands face to face with the irrational. He feels within him his longing for happiness and for reason. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. This must not be forgotten. This must be clung to because the whole the whole consequence of life can depend on it. The irrational, the human nostalgia, and the absurd that is born of their encounter. These are the three characters in the drama that must necessarily end with all the logic of which existence is capable, end quote. And he goes on in the next pages to call that the Trinity, right? So on the one hand, you have the human tendency towards what he calls here nostalgia, which I think is the light of reason, like that, everything can be made sense of, or at least one time it did, or sometime it will, and we're going to hold out hope of either a return or a coming, right? And then there's the irrational, which is what he thinks is the plain fact that's just not how the world works, right? And then like the dialectical offspring of those two things, the absurd, right?
Yes.
Right. Like the fact that the holding those two things together, both we demand nostalgia and we will never get it. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. A very brilliant description of the human condition, right?
Yes, absolutely. I like that he also he calls them absurd walls a lot. So just the previous page of the paragraph you just read from. So he says, the world is people, or let's see, what I fail to understand is nonsense. The world is people with such irrationals. The world itself, whose single meaning I do not understand, is but a vast irrational. If one could only say just once, this is clear, all would be saved. But these men vie with one another in proclaiming that nothing is clear, all is chaos, that all man has is his lucidity and his definite knowledge of the walls surrounding him.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he's saying rationality itself is kind of walled in by nostalgia, right?
Yeah. If you go up on page 40, he brings this exact thing up very explicitly. He says, it's actually page 48. No. Yeah, page 48. At the bottom of the one whole paragraph there, he says, the absurd is lucid reason noting its limits, right? It's lucid reason noting its limits, right? So like what to be absurd, like to accept the absurd, to see the absurd, is to realize we're inside of certain walls, right? That will never, like, our reason will never break out like of the Kantian box and get into the noumenal realm, and thereby things will make sense of this, right? Do you know what I mean? And so it's interesting. It's sort of like a lot of what I think what Camus is doing here is he's leaving us in Kant's first critique without the second critique, right? So Kant says we can get out into the moral, into the noumenal world through moral reason, right? Like the demand that the world makes sense has to be satisfied, and it's going to be satisfied in a moral order that is beyond all like empirical verification, right? Okay. And Camus saying is no. All we can really do is say we realize reason is boxed in.
Yes.
It can only get us so far because ultimately the world it confronts doesn't make moral sense, right? And you get like, whereas like Descartes operates by metaphors of light, it's interesting. Camus operates by metaphors of walls.
Yes.
Right? And you think, well, what do walls do? They stop light.
Yes.
The light can't shine out from there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's interesting. I was not expecting this. Is like really, at least this first essay, it's a treatise on the consequences of admitting the limitations of reason.
Yes.
Right. And then once again, you can see it's this interesting critique of modern philosophy, whereas Descartes seems to ultimately think human reason is really unlimited, right? It can get the whole thing. Kant tries to put it, through a critique, what we talked about in our last episode, right? Through a critique to put it on a sound, give us a good manual that we can use it and reliably get to the world with it. And now Camus saying that is false hope. That's a kind of philosophical suicide. And all we're going to end up doing is thinking our own narcissistic, nostalgic thoughts based on that.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, because you're still living within the walls of a narrative, right?
Yeah.
So to your point earlier, I mean, when something really, what I like about Camus as well is that he goes into the dark places, right? So, I mean, he's got another book about murder or muckduck or whatever you want to call it, and it's interesting how he looks into those phenomena and realizes what that does to us. What it opens up for our minds. Because, like you said, I mean, you can create a narrative around why your 5-year-old daughter passed away, but it doesn't matter. Shouldn't have freaking happened, right? Like
This is something we talked about when we talked about Sartre. And we should mention here too is, okay, when's Camus writing? He's writing, I believe he's writing this one in the 1950s. Am I right? Either way, it's post World War II. And he's an Algerian. He's born in French Algiers, right? Which wasn't French at all. It was taken from them, right? So he's born under the colonial oppression. The absolutely horrific war is going on between the French, colonial powers and people in Algeria. While this is going on, Camus is very attuned to that struggle. He's come out of World War II. Everybody just lived through an absolute horror show in France, right? Okay, everyone in the world, right? But in particular, the French suffered conquest, saw people sell out and do the most terrible things and collaborating with Nazis, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Camus is saying, not unlike what Sartre was saying, that's okay, and you're going to tell me the fact that human beings can do that, right, somehow makes any sense.
Exactly.
Right. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Okay, so it seems that it is clear human beings are capable of utterly and horrible, murderous things on scales that no one fathomed before. And now Camus says, and you're going to tell me it's going to all be right, all okay in the end, right? Right. I think that's what he's doing here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, or that the Enlightenment project is still on some victor's path.
Exactly, because I think he's absolutely lampooning the two great, figures of the Enlightenment project, Descartes and Kant. Right. I think that's really who he's lampooning here. Right. And it's interesting, like any good writer, he doesn't mention them. I don't think.
No,
maybe Kant.
No,
but I think it's there.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're keeping score at home, you're going to notice. Oh wait, he's talking about Descartes and Kant. Another thing which was interesting in this is he does, I think, I didn't count them, I probably should have, but he seems to spend the most pages criticizing people he calls the existentials.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I think it's clear he doesn't have Sartre in mind here. He doesn't have de Beauvoir in mind here. Doesn't have Merleau-Ponty in mind here. These aren't the French existentialists that he has in mind. Okay, what we would call. And it's not clear how many of them would have called themselves existentialists, right? But he spends a great deal of time criticizing Jaspers and Kierkegaard and Chestov, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think those are, and Heidegger too. Okay, and let's face it, for a French-speaking person in the 1940s and 50s, Heidegger's low-hanging fruit for criticism. Okay, but I think what's interesting here, because these are the people he's talking about when he brings up the accusation of philosophical suicide.
Yes.
Right. Because in all their cases, although I don't think he doesn't put Heidegger here, he has other words about Heidegger. Okay. And basically, we're really, he accuses all of these people of a kind of backdoor theism.
Yes.
Right? Which is what we used as our way of contrasting Sartre and Heidegger. Right. So whereas Heidegger, says, wait, in the end, outside of being, there has to be the nothing and the nothings, and there's a contrast to being, which seems to presuppose that we can step outside the walls now and still see the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there's a kind of negative apophatic theism that a lot of people thought Heidegger was kind of sneaking in the back door to save the day here, right? And Camus is attuned to that in this essay, right?
Yes.
I think he even quotes What is Metaphysics, right?
Yes.
And also he brings up with respect to Kierkegaard and Jaspers is that they say, look, it turns out things don't make sense, so we can just abandon reason entirely and make this leap of faith, right? And just sort of like find a kind of hope in the irrational, right? Because we've found the tension between nostalgia and the worm in the heart, between reason and the worm in the heart, then we can just ignore reason now, right?
Yes.
And anything goes, and you can just make a leap, and it's your leap, and you can hold on to it, and no one can correct you because reason, like to quote Martin Luther, is a whore, right? Like we're giving it up, okay? And this is the thing that I found fascinating about Camus. He says, no, damn it, right? You can't just reject reason. Like reason has its claim, and you can't deny that you do have a well-grounded expectation that things would fit together. But then at the same time, you have to agree that that doesn't work out that way. Do you see
Yes.
that, right? And so he's not a rationalist, but he's not an irrationalist, right? He's not a fideist either, right? And
Yeah.
it's not just anything goes now. Like all you get for Camus is the tension. You don't get to affirm either side of that dialectic.
Yes.
You only get the tension.
Yeah. He actually kind of, I thought he was most harsh on Kierkegaard, to be honest. He kind of really went after him. So like here's on page 37, it says Kierkegaard likewise takes the leap. His childhood having been so frightened by Christianity, he ultimately returns to its harshest aspect. For him too, antinomy and paradox become criteria of the religious. Thus, the very thing that led to despair of the meaning and depth of this life now gives its truth and its clarity. Christianity is the scandal, and what Kierkegaard calls quite plainly is the third sacrifice required by Ignatius Loyola, the one in which God most rejoices, the sacrifice of the intellect. I mean, he just, I thought that was a bit of obliteration, to be honest. I thought he just really went after him on that one.
And it's pretty ad hominem.
It is. It is. Yeah.
Okay. And Kierkegaard, I think, would admit as much in a lot of ways. Like he would say, yeah, look, you're right, Camus. What I'm counseling you to do, right, is to find something that only you can affirm.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only do that if you're affirming something that makes no sense whatsoever. Okay. So
exactly.
Kierkegaard, you have to like affirm a contradiction if you're going to achieve a kind of free subjectivity. Okay. But I don't think Kierkegaard will say is like you have to have this teleological suspension of the ethical law, right? But he says very clearly in Fear and Trembling that is not to deny the claim of the ethical law,
mm-hmm.
right? Okay, so I actually would read Kierkegaard closer to Camus than Camus reads Kierkegaard, right?
Yes.
I don't think Kierkegaard's saying the claim of reason can just be abandoned, right? Like for Kierkegaard, it's not absurd unless you recognize the claim of reason,
mm-hmm.
affirm the claim of reason, and yet say, I'm still going to affirm this thing that runs contrary to it, right?
Exactly.
So I actually read them closer together, but
yeah, it was interesting too because I wonder how much Camus just had more of a problem with him placing a lot of this in a religious context. Well, he says that he puts the idea of paradox in the subject of the religious, and I think Camus would just already have a problem with that.
Yeah.
But I think Kierkegaard has a legitimate claim in some sense with that. So it's not to say that
I agree.
Either is right or wrong here, but
it's like Kierkegaard might be not quite secular enough for Camus. Yeah. right. You know what I mean? But also though, I think there were horrid abuses of existentialism, right? Where people
mm-hmm.
were able to say, I'm going to commit myself to being a Nazi because that's my existential choice. Right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see why he's worried about it, right? But I agree with that. I don't think they're as far apart as Camus lets on. And at a certain point, and I'm sorry I don't have a page reference on this, Camus like summarizes by saying what the absurd is to raise the question of whether we can live without any appeal. And I think what he means is like, can we live without having any higher authority to which we can appeal? Like on the one hand, we know that we have to justify ourselves. It's very Sartrean here, right? We have to make a justification for ourselves. But at the same time, we know there's nothing that we can use external to ourselves to make that justification.
Mm-hmm.
So can we live lives, right, without any external justification?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually read a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I read a lot of, and we'll get into kind of his answer ultimately to the question, but I read a lot of maybe localism might be the right word, of like this kind of like world engine that we're all concerned about, even with the Enlightenment project, of like we're all on this trajectory. And he's kind of like, actually, life is most lived in your personal experiences and in your personal relationships. So I mean, you can have an ethical system to appeal to, but you are going to have your own ethical system, and that's how you treat other people in your life. That's where you get a lot of the quote unquote meaning to your life is in the local.
Yeah, you're ultimately going to have to make this work here in the local in the particular, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. And you're going to have to work this out in an ongoing common project with real concrete particular others in your life, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And to whom do you appeal for that? No one but us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we can have all sorts of like absolute abiding moral principles. That's fine, right? But ultimately, how that works out is going to have to be negotiated, right? Or
Yes.
negotiate is the wrong word. It's going to have to be worked out with, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to have to be done in tandem with the people that are the concrete presences in your life, right?
Exactly.
And for that, there's no appeal. There's nothing you
Exactly.
can appeal to, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so maybe should we get into his notion of absurd freedom and then his solution, at least at this moment in the text, to the problem, his answer to the problem? Sure. Um, what I found was really fascinating in his take on absurd freedom. If you go up to page 58, and here too, there's a inner unity here with Sartre and the other French existentialists, which is not a surprise to anyone. But if you look on page 58, he makes this, what I think is a very decisive point. All right. Actually, bottom of 57. I'm not going to read it. Um, but I think running up to that point, he's making a case that um, like freedom does not mean you choose your life in the sense that you're going to make it up from the ground up, right? That he, like Sartre, thinks that we are thrown into a situation, okay, right? That I didn't get to choose who my parents were. I don't really get to choose who my friends are in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I don't get to choose, the weather, all these things, right? I don't get to choose the political moment that I live in. I don't get to choose all these things, right? So for him, it's interesting. Freedom begins first with this notion of thrownness, like you're in this
Mm-hmm.
situation, right? And the idea that you're gonna like that you could have a different situation, that's just another like nostalgia for
Mm-hmm.
people, right? Okay. So interestingly, once again, going back to one of the central metaphors of this text is freedom begins with a realization that you're in certain walls, right? Okay, that you're bound in a certain way, right? That you're in a certain box, right? And there's no nostalgic get out of the box there, okay? And I think he's saying that that's where freedom begins because only then can you see what the real world choices are before you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, once I give up the idea that somehow I could master my situation, right? And like utterly transform the world, or that there's some cavalry coming that's going to do that. Only then can I actually look at the concrete realities in front of me and make a choice about what I'm going to do.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think what he's saying also is to realize your throne is to realize the absurd, to realize you're in a box, to realize you're limited, right? To realize you never get a full answer to anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what the free act is there is a kind of rebellion against that.
Yes.
Okay. Because he goes on, like right after this, to say consciousness itself is a kind of rebellion. And I think
Yes.
what he means is not being asleep, being woke, dare I say, right? Okay.
Yes.
Not being asleep, being aware, understanding the human situation is a kind of rebellion because what freedom is to realize your thrownness, to realize the absurd, and then still refuse to literally kill yourself or to kill yourself as a subject, right? By taking one of these false hopes or vain
Yes.
hopes, I should say. Does that make sense? Right.
Yes.
And that's why for him, that notion of rebellion is central to his thought, right?
Yes.
Like your refusal to fall into like Kierkegaardian irrationalism, or your refusal to fall into Kierkegaardian irrationalism or Cartesian rationalism, right? Your refusal to like fall into like an unquestioning fundamentalism of any sort, right? That's a rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a refusal to go back to sleep, which is really what the world wants you to do, right? Is to go
Yes.
back to sleep.
To rebel is to stay alive.
Is
Right.
to stay alive. Exactly. Exactly. To stay
Yeah.
alive in like this capital A alive, right? Like
Yes.
alive as a subject,
Yes.
as a free subject that is not denying both the claim of reason and the revelation of the heart.
Yes. So intellectually and physically as well, because he even says that death ultimately is not a freedom. Everything's
Right.
over at that point, right? You're not free.
Right.
So
Exactly. You know what I mean? And it's only once I realized my being boxed, my being thrown, that kind of rebellion, right, becomes a possibility.
yes.
You know what I mean? And that means too that I then still continue to live, right, and take action for him, right? Yeah.
It's, I mean, I saw the final end of it of recognize the absurdity, recognize you're in your walls, recognize that sometimes experiences undermine you, recognize that there are powers around you trying to shift your consciousness towards one thing or another, and revolt against all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like realize it all, like understand your thrownness, understand what's going on. But then the real revolution is you being a free person within those things and understanding and be able to see them.
He's not taking the Heidegger, Zizek'ian moron move.
Exactly.
Like, I'm going to go back and make the village great again. I'm going to act as if I'm not a subject. Right. Okay. He's also not doing the idiocy thing and saying like, oh, I can transcend my circumstances entirely. Right. Right. He's not doing that. Right. He's occupying the tenuous middle ground to say, right, I'm limited, and yet I refuse to use that as an excuse to deny my subjectivity, or to do something like reckless too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is a very good primer on recognizing ideology. To be honest, I think that way of seeing these things is very helpful, because I think ultimately that's what he's trying to say. Like recognize these things exist, and they'll take you down paths you don't want to go.
Yeah. Or at the very least, they will, like, if you get something you can hang your hat on, it will rob you of your subjectivity.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody should write a book called Subjectivity and Its Discontents. Oh, wait.
Hey. Exactly.
As it were. Anyway, shameless plug. Coming soon. But okay, so here's where I come apart from Camus, and I think probably Sartre does too. And I'm interested in seeing if we come apart on this, Jerry. Towards the very end, though, he starts talking about his ethic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his ethic, he says, like, we can't really have a qualitative ethic anymore. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's no ultimate separation from good and evil. Mm-hmm. We can have a qualitative ethic, right? And so he ends up like affirming like literally the accumulation of novel experience.
Yes.
Right. So so Camus thinks that what can make your life worth living is I don't think he uses the word accumulation. Maybe that's me trying to like backdoor accuse him of like capitalist ideology, which maybe I am. But is the accumulation of novel sensuous experiences. Okay.
Yes.
And it's a kind of hedonism. It doesn't have to be like, but when we say hedonism, we have to remember, like, in a sense, Plato and Aristotle are hedonists, right? They justify the good based on like its ultimate sense of pleasantness to us, right? It's the most pleasant life. Okay. And I think Camus he's not necessarily coming out for like a Benthamite hedonism, but more of a Mill's hedonism, like better mm-hmm. dissatisfied Socrates than a dissatisfied pig, right? But he doesn't seem, he says like, oh, so really what we can do now, we can judge our lives based on how much novelty we can incorporate into them. Okay?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. He uses the metaphor of flames, right? Yeah. And he actually says almost an obeying of the flames that happens whenever you revolt against the absurd. And yeah, I think I would exit there too, just because I'm pretty fully convinced that the best way to experience life is filial love and familial love. I think that requires a self-sacrifice. I think it requires not having a lot of experiences because, yeah, I'd love to, my wife and I go off and do some awesome stuff, but I got kids to take care of. And to me, that's way more a better life for me.
It's interesting, like Kierkegaard distinguishes between the aesthete, right, and then the person of the moral law, and then the religious person, right. And the religious person affirms the absurd. The person of moral law like affirms just pure rational commitment, and then the aesthete just lives for experience. It seems now, I could be wrong, that Kierkegaard's kind of coming out for, or Camus coming out for Kierkegaard's aesthete, right? Right, like okay, like I think for me, this is where I see Camus departing from Sartre, right? Because like Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, he is not recommending an ethic of novelty. In fact, he's recommending an ethic of commitment. Like the only way you can achieve any kind of being in itself at all is through a commitment, though realizing that those commitments are ultimately inauthentic and you'll have to revisit them constantly. But for Sartre, it's not novelty. It's commitment that will secure free lives for us, right?
Yes.
It's saying, like he says, again and again, freedom is absurd, right? Because it seems that it requires of us to give a justification of what we're doing, but then admitting that nothing grounds that justification but our commitment to it, right?
Yes.
But then the commitment has to be free, right? And so it's circular absurd, right? Where he says, it seems like the fundamental human project is to be God, right? And what does he mean by that? Well, it's a for itself that's still in itself, that has an ultimate nature, right, that it chooses. Okay, and for Sartre, that means we're looking for this ultimate commitment we can make that will define us. But ultimately, I can't say any commitment ever does that, because it was up to me to do it, and I could have done otherwise, right?
Yes.
So my own brand of existentialism definitely strays towards the Sartrean, right?
Yes.
Because it does seem like there is a kind of, although tenuous, definition of myself that can be achieved there, right? Even though I know at some point it falls into bad faith.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I just think that, I think that what I'm getting from Camus out of this is that life really is worth living. Now, how you go about that is the question, and where I might disagree.
Yeah. I think my takeaway, my positive takeaway, right? Like the last 5 pages I check out from him, right? But before that, where he's like, look, man, once you admit that you're in a box, right? Your way of dignity is to constantly test that box.
Yes.
Constantly test the box, right? To that I say, amen. Preach it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd like to think that I've I've spent my adult life trying to test the box, right? Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, rebel against it, right? Rebel against the absurd. So.
Exactly. Cool,
man. Well, that's a fun episode.
That brings us to the end of essay 1 of the Myth of Sisyphus.
Yeah. So next week we'll jump into the rest of it.
Excellent.
But that was fun.
And as always, we want the Legion to create novel experiences by hitting that like and share button. Right.
Exactly.
Right. By all means, go for it. We do appreciate you.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a Patreon. Yeah. So, and maybe we'll have more to say about that in the near future, including merch.
Yep. Yeah, merch is on its way for sure.
Merch is on its way. So
yeah.
All right. Good,
awesome, man.
Well, hey, as always, I was benefited by our conversation, Jared. So
same. Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.
All right, go rebel.